Imagine that you're hiking in the wilderness with friends. As you walk along the designated trail with your group, you're continually turning and having a conversation with your friend. All the while, you're aware of the chirping of the birds and the crunch of branches and debris under your feet. Suddenly, there is silence behind you, and when you turn around, your friend is gone. It was mere seconds since your head turned to see them last. Now, they're just simply not there. Even stranger, the birds have stopped chirping and everything is deathly silent. People vanish all the time across the globe. Investigators' first step is to uncover where they were last seen and then work out at what point they went missing. But what if we bring this gap closer? What if we make it so that the gap is nothing more than an instant? 1 second you're looking straight at someone, and then you blink and they're gone. This sounds like the plot of a 2014 movie called Don't Blink, a psychological thriller in which a group of 10 people attend a cabin for a weekend getaway. One by one they begin to vanish, right in front of each other.
Oh my god.
Are you kidding me?
Sure, this is just a movie, but what if it was real? What if there are so many documented cases of this strange happening that it would be impossible to cover it all in one video? Hi folks, I'm Johnny and welcome to The Oddest. Today we're going to take a wee look at the missing 411. Don't blink. The term missing 411 was coined by an ex-police detective by the name of David Politis. He now spends his days investigating disappearances, in particular those that occur across the many national parks of North America. He believes that these vanishings are strange and unusual and defy logic and conventional explanation. The missing 411 is a massive project. Politis himself has published 10 books about the strange vanishings, and there has been many countless YouTube videos and documentaries made about this topic. People go missing all the time in national parks in North America. Today there are 401 national parks across the US, covering a staggering 84 million acres. So what makes a 411 case? Well, cases that have fairly obvious elements are not classed as a missing 411 case. Cases that may have been foul play or misadventure, accidents or animal attacks. These cases are not classed as 411. The cases that do qualify are those that have no rational explanation and often have evidence to suggest that, well, something else is going on. The problem with people vanishing and going missing is that it makes it harder to ascertain exactly what happened, to piece together their final moments leading up to that. But what if they came back? So in this first video of the series, we're going to cover only a few of these cases where people vanished, seemingly off the face of the planet, and returned, and more often than not, what they had to say is nothing short of terrifying. Let's go to Ritter, Oregon. It's 1952 and 3-year-old Keith Parkins was playing with his older siblings outside on his grandfather's ranch. When the family were all called in for lunch, they noticed that there was no Keith. After shouting for the wee lad and briefly searching the property, they got the authorities involved. Swiftly they arrived and a massive search was underway for the young boy. Nothing was found until later that night. Searchers found small footprints that they believed to be that of Keith's. The problem was, these prints were found 4 miles away on a woodland path. There were no signs of other prints nearby. It just seemed like these were the sole prints of the young boy. But when they followed the trail of prints, they just suddenly stopped, mid-stride. Sickeningly, nighttime had come and gone with still no sign of the wee boy, and the family began to fear the worst. That was until the next morning, when 12 miles away, Keith would be found alive. Although he was alive, he was found with deep scratches on his face. Next to him in a neat pile was his jacket and woolly hat. Of course you're not going to get much information from a boy that's just turned 3 years old. When asked, the only thing the boy could say was that he was scratched by a cat. That's all he kept saying when he was asked, that a cat scratched his face. One of the bizarre things about this case is that how can a 3-year-old cover that distance throughout the night? It's impossible. Also the fact that the wee lad certainly wasn't dressed for the cold temperatures. Later on, a professional outdoorsman would attempt to cover that same distance in the allotted time across harsh terrain in the pitch dark of night. Even he said it was almost impossible for a physically fit adult male equipped for such a thing to cover that distance in that time. Years later, when Keith was an adult, he would be interviewed about it, and he still claims to have no memory of it at all. In October of 2010, this family, that have chosen to be anonymous for various reasons which I'm sure will become clear, decided to go on a wee camping trip. The family consisted of a 4-year-old boy, his 9-year-old sister and both the parents. The campsite that they chose was a fairly popular one on Mount Shasta in California. Once they got to the campsite and got everything all set up, they were all sitting doing the usual things like all sitting around a campfire, telling stories and making s'mores. You know, all that good stuff. The sister would say that she was looking at her wee brother when she turned away for a split second, only to turn back and the boy had vanished. As the girl began to freak out, the whole family jumped up and ran around looking for the kid, but to no avail. They soon contacted the authorities and a full-scale search was swiftly underway. For the next 5 hours, hundreds of searchers scoured every inch of the campsite for the wee boy, or any clues as to where he could have gone. The search went further afield to include areas out with the main campsite itself. 5 hours later, they found the boy laying on a thicket in the middle of a trail that had already been searched many times by various investigators, which meant that at some point since the last searcher checked that area, the boy had somehow arrived at that exact location. Initially, no one really cared how he got there. Everyone, including his family, was just so happy and relieved that the kid was found safe and returned unharmed back to his family. Job well done. The wee lad was taken to the hospital to be checked over and was given a clean bill of health, and everything returned back to normal. That was until about 3 weeks later, when the young lad was hanging out with his grandmother. The boy and his sister affectionately called their grandmother Cappy. Now, bearing in mind that the boy was only 4 years old, so his language skills and the ability to articulate his thoughts would be questionable, but despite this, the conversation he had with his Cappy that day would make a startling connection to another story. As he was sitting with Cappy, he turned to her and said, "I like you, Cappy, much better than the other Cappy. I don't like her." His grandmother Cappy looked puzzled at the boy and asked what he meant. She was his only Cappy. Now, this story that he is about to tell, he had already tried to tell to his father, but his father just shrugged it off as the ramblings of a 4-year-old with an overactive imagination. The boy would go on to say that the night that they were camping on Mount Shasta, as he was sitting with his sister, he turned and saw Cappy. Cappy was waving at him and beckoned him to come towards her. Of course, the wee boy was thrilled to see his grandmother there and ran straight towards Cappy. This Cappy would then lead the young lad up a hill to a nearby cave. Now, the entire time that this wee lad is telling this story, Grandma Cappy is thinking to herself, "Holy crap, that was not me. And it's someone that looks like me and tried to abduct my grandson." Anyway, she asked the young man to continue with his story. He went on to say that once inside that cave, he saw lots of insects and stuff, but also there were lots and lots of purses and bags in piles inside the cave, as well as other people that looked like statues, frozen. He said that when he turned to look at Cappy, that her head was glowing and that she seemed frustrated and started asking him all sorts of questions. Questions which he didn't know the answer to. After a short time, this other Cappy angrily took him out of the cave, and then he said that that's when he ended up in the thicket where he was found by the search team. Cappy reassured the boy and immediately went to speak to the lad's father. She relayed this story to him, and his dad was like, "Oh my God, I remember him telling me that story. But surely it's just his imagination. But Kappy had a story to tell of her own. So Kappy would sit down with the boys' parents and tell them that a few years prior, she and a friend went up to the same campgrounds on Mount Shasta for a wee overnight camp trip. She went on to say that at some point during the night, her and her friend had this horrible, overwhelming feeling that they were being watched. Soon they would see what she described as a pair of glowing eyes a short distance away in the tree line looking at them. So immediately Kappy and her friend got flashlights in the direction of the eyes, but they would vanish. They were experienced campers and knew that all sorts of animals roamed the forest areas there. The main issue is, until they got a light on it, they don't know if it's a big cat or a bear. But throughout the night, she would say that these eyes would show up at different points all around them, only to vanish each time that they tried to shine a light on it. After several hours, and they hadn't seen the eyes for a while, they decided to go to bed. Kappy was sleeping in a tent, and her friend was sleeping in a wee camper. When morning came around, Kappy would wake up completely outside of her tent and on the ground. As she picked herself up, she became aware of a sharp pain on the back of her neck. As she looked up, her friend is face down on the dirt outside the camper. She went over and woke him up, and he's clearly confused as to why he's outside. He too was exhibiting the same strange cut on the back of his neck. The pair assumed that they may have been bitten by the same type of poisonous insect or spider, and this caused them to wander outside in the night. We don't know if there could be some sort of connection between these two stories, but it certainly seems too coincidental, don't you think? In 1868 in North Michigan, a 3-year-old girl vanished from her father's camp. The father is obviously distraught in not being able to find the child, so he gathered a group of his hunter friends and they start spreading out to try and locate the wee lassie. After a few hours searching, they start to hear what sounds like a girl's voice. The men all gather together and they're able to move in the direction where they can hear the wee girl. The group end up off the beaten track and having to push through the thick woodland as they get closer to the voice. After climbing through a thicket, the men are startled when a large bear bursts out in front of them, but it doesn't charge at them or try to attack them. It seemed like they just scared this huge animal, which then runs away from them. With their focus primarily being on finding the girl, the men let the bear run off into the woods. Of course, their main concern is that if this is the direction where the girl is, it's not a good sign seeing a bear at the same time in the same area. Sure enough, the team emerge from the thicket into a small clearing where they found the girl. She was totally unharmed and calm. The father scooped up the girl and they get to a position of safety. When the father then asks his daughter what happened, she quite frankly tells him that Mr. Wolf brought me here. Mr. Wolf was playing with me and Mr. Wolf fed me berries. Whether or not the bear had anything to do with this, it's possible that the bear heard the commotion and came for a wee look out of curiosity, but some sort of animal or creature had taken the girl, called Mr. Wolf. In 1955, a whole family made up of mother and father and 8 children set up camp in a campground in Montana. Ida Mae was the youngest girl at just 2 years old, and as such she was staying in a tent with 2 of her older siblings. So not long after dinner, 2 of the oldest siblings were sitting in the tent with 2-year-old Ida Mae. And the way it was set up was that the oldest kids were deeper into the tent and little Ida Mae was sitting close to the opening of the tent. The tent flap was wide open, as was the other tents, so that all the kids were in view of each other and also the parents. In a short moment, as the parents were busying themselves clearing up, the older kids would later report that to their horror a bear casually reached into the tent and scooped up Ida Mae. As the kids were frozen in shock, they said that they saw the bear running away, clutching Ida Mae in its arm and running on 3 legs. The kids immediately raised the alarm, screaming for their parents, and soon the authorities were in attendance. After the investigators spoke to the 2 older kids, they asked them several times what really happened to their baby sister, because bears don't do that. They wouldn't do this scooping motion with their arms, so what really happened? But the kids were adamant that that's exactly what happened. A bear, or bear-type creature, scooped up their little sister and ran off into the woods. So, 2 days go by, and there is no trace of the wee lassie. Of course, the parents and the family are grief-stricken. But it was after 2 days that one of the searchers discovered, about 300 yards away from the camp, a strange structure that had been purpose-built, like a shelter or a wee hut that someone would build out in the woods, and inside they would find Ida May alive, well and unharmed. The only thing we know about this case is that the wee lassie would go on to say that Mr. Bear cuddled me, Mr. Bear played with me, and Mr. Bear fed me berries. Mind, she was only 2 at the time, but that's all we have. She was returned safe to her family. In 1978, Stephen Kubaki was a 23-year-old student at Hope University in Michigan. This was a Christian school where Stephen was studying history and German. Stephen was deemed to be a bit more outgoing than most of the students at Hope University, as it was a very tight-collar, conservative establishment. One of Stephen's big passions was skiing. He loved the outdoors in general, but especially loved a wee shoop-shoop on the slopes. It was in February of 1978 that Stephen decided to go on a solo ski trip around Lake Michigan. It was coming up to graduation and he wanted a wee bit of time to blow off some steam doing what he loved. The particular area that Stephen chose to go to would become known as the Lake Michigan Triangle. Dating back to the 1800s, there's been countless strange disappearances that have occurred in this area, and it quickly adopted the name of the Michigan Triangle, a bit like the mysterious Bermuda Triangle. Like most that feature in these stories, Stephen was an accomplished outdoorsman and skier. So when he tells friends and family that he's heading up to Lake Michigan for a day trip to ski, no one really thinks too much of it. He's done it before, he'll be totally fine. The following day, after Stephen had set off on his trip, a couple were out on the edge of Lake Michigan on snowmobiles when they noticed something peculiar. So they first noticed what looked like ski tracks that led up to the very edge of the lake. So basically, tracks heading straight for what looked like the lake itself. Once they got to the edge of the lake, they found a set of skis in situ and 2 ski poles dug into the snow, still propped upright. So imagine if someone had skied to the edge of the water, stopped, drove their ski poles into the ground and stepped out of the skis and into the water. That's pretty much what it looked like. Only it was well below freezing and the lake itself was a frozen ice sheet, but there was no obvious signs that anyone had either gone onto the ice, and there was no broken ice at that location to indicate that someone fell through the ice to the frozen waters beneath. Nonetheless, they had to quickly report this discovery in the chance that they could be wrong. So remember, this was the day after Stephen had set off, so it was about this time that his family lodged an official missing persons report, because he should have been back from Lake Michigan by now. Almost immediately, a connection was made from the missing persons report for Stephen and the discovery of the skis and ski poles, so a massive search was launched, all starting at the side of the lake where the skis were found. The thing is, his tracks went right up to the edge of the lake and just stopped. There were no more tracks on the frozen lake. There weren't any tracks or footprints off to the side, so it wasn't like he stepped out of his skis and walked around the edge. There was nothing. It was like he just vanished. So, as if this case couldn't get any weirder, the couple on the snowmobiles found his skis and ski poles. Then the search teams arrive, and the first place they go to is the skis and the ski poles, still in situ, as when they were found. The make and model of the skis were noted, and all that, but then, like, from nowhere, his backpack turns up during the search, right next to his skis. The backpack certainly wasn't there before, and there would have been dozens, if not more, sets of eyes on it and around that area. Yet somehow, his backpack arrived at that location. After a long and thorough investigation, they ultimately determined that Stephen must have wandered out onto the frozen lake and at some point fell through the ice. Needless to say, his family and friends were devastated by this news. 15 months later, there's a knock on the door and Stephen's father answers it. Standing there, right in front of him, is Stephen. His father was amazed and stunned. Standing right there before him was his son that was declared dead a year and a half ago. And yet, here he is. So what happened to him? His father tried to explain what happened, but Stephen had no idea or recollection of the past 15 months. His father had to show him a newspaper with today's date on it and a notice of his son being missing. His father would tell him that he was missing in Lake Michigan, over 700 miles away. How did he end up here? Stephen would say that he had no idea and that he woke up in a field about 40 miles from the house. He went to his aunt's house nearby and she in turn brought him here. In Stephen's possession, he had a new backpack that he didn't recognise. He was wearing clothes that he didn't know anything about. He was well groomed, he was shaved, he had a haircut. He even had new glasses and lenses, but he had no recollection of any of it. Inside his new belongings, he had keepsakes and maps from various other parts of the country. He was even wearing a t-shirt from a Wisconsin marathon, which said on it that he was a participant in. Stephen would speak to the media only once about his disappearance, in which he still claimed to have no memories of where he had been, but he said that he felt like he had been running a lot. In 2018, Danny Philippidis was a firefighter living in Canada. He was 49 years old at the time and was married with 2 kids. Every year, he and his firefighting colleagues would go on a ski trip to New York to a mountain called Whiteface. This was an annual event and they all looked forward to it. Danny in particular was an avid skier. On February 7th, 2018, Danny and 7 of his colleagues all made the journey, as they did every year, to Whiteface. It was coming up for lunchtime when everyone decided to head back to the lodge for some much needed grub and warmth. Danny had said to his mates that he would meet them there because he felt like he was in the zone and wanted a few more runs before lunch. Not to worry, they all said, we'll see you shortly at the lodge. After lunch, a few hours had passed. His mates started getting a wee bit worried. No one had seen or heard from him. They all checked their phones and no text messages, nothing. They thought to themselves that, maybe Danny just chose to skip lunch and continue with some more ski runs. He certainly loved to ski. They decided to go to the main resort building to check on him, and after getting into his room, he wasn't there and all of his stuff and personal belongings were still there in the room. So they went and checked for his car, and sure enough, his car was still in the same parking spot. They checked with the resort staff and they hadn't seen him, so it became clear that Danny must still be on the mountain. Things started to get a bit worrying when the mountain was closing down for the night and still no one could find Danny. So pretty soon a search was launched to find him. So to paint a picture, Whiteface Ski Resort at that time of year is a busy wee place, so there were plenty of people around to speak to, interview and generally ask if they had seen Danny. Also, the fact that the snowfall that day was pretty heavy. This just means that for someone to get off that mountain any other way besides coming back through the resort, it would almost be impossible. Yet, there was still no trace of Danny at all. After an extensive search and speaking to nearly 100 skiers, they had to tell his family and friends the sad news that unfortunately, Danny must have succumbed to the elements along the way and the worst has happened. So after a day or so, whilst the family and loved ones are still coming to grips with the reality of the situation, the phone rings and his wife answers it. Although she would later say it was hard to hear the caller at first, immediately she identified the voice as her husband's. It was Danny. But she also knew that something was wrong. She said that he sounded confused on the phone. He said that he doesn't know where he is and he was just in general confused. She immediately told him to hang up and call 911. He needs to speak to the police. So he agrees, and straight away the police get a phone call from Danny. He basically told them the same story. He doesn't know what's going on or where he is, and he needs help. The police operator on the phone was able to calm him down and asked him to describe his surroundings and any landmarks that he could see, which he did, and thankfully the police were able to trace him. He was calling from Sacramento, California, 2,900 miles away from Whiteface, New York. What's even more mind-blowing, right? Are you ready for this? So when the cops go and fetch Danny from where he was in California, he was found still wearing all of his ski equipment. He still had on his ski boots, his winter jacket. He even still had on his ski goggles on top of his head. Besides all that, he was clean shaven. He had a fresh new haircut and had a brand new iPhone. Yet he had no money. He had no wallet, no ID. Mind, all of his stuff was still back in his room at Whiteface. To this day, Danny has no recollection of how he got from that mountain in New York to the heat of Sacramento. He doesn't know how he got a haircut or where the new phone came from. So this story, although it's been documented in the past century, the exact location is a bit unclear, but it's believed to be either Scotland or Ireland. So in 1898, a wee 12-year-old boy was playing in a stream near his house, a place that he had played many times before. It was one of his favourite places to play. He spent the better part of his morning and afternoon stacking rocks and boulders on the stream, building a wee dam for himself to see if he could catch any fish. At some point, the boy became aware of someone walking down the edge of the stream towards him. As he looked up, he would later say that it looked like a normal person. It was an older man and he was well dressed. The man approached him and was asking about his activities. He asked him what he was up to, and the boy said that he was building a dam and hopefully he might trap some fish. So the man said, "Wow, that looks like a lot of hard work. Maybe you should take a wee break." The boy agreed, and the man said, "Well, you know, my house is only up the road, just around the corner. My family and children are there, so if you want, you can come and play with my kids and maybe get some hot food." I know what you're thinking, right? But it was a different time back then, and it was a fairly countryside type of area. The wee boy happily agreed and followed the man back to the house. Just as they got to the top of the hill, the man was like, "Here we are, here's my home," and it was a nice wee cabin built out in the woods. Now, the young boy lived there all of his life, and he knows these woods. He'd never seen that cabin before, or the man he just met. But he wasn't overly worried, as before they got up to the cabin itself, he could see that there were lights on inside and he could hear kids playing and giggling inside. He also sees, sitting on the porch, a family friend that he recognises. So he waves to the family friend, who waves back and says hi, and the boy goes inside. Once inside, he sees it's a lovely wee home, and sure enough, the man has a couple of kids roughly the same age as the boy, so they make their introductions and the kids play together for a little bit. Then the mother of the kids shouts them all into the kitchen for some well-deserved food. The boy is thinking, this is great. It was a friendly place, and he enjoyed playing with the kids. At one point after dinner, the kids had said that they would show him their room, and they played as kids do for a while. Then at some point the boy ended up falling asleep on top of one of the kids' beds. It wasn't until sunrise the next day that the boy woke up in a panic, feeling awful because he didn't mean to fall asleep and his family will be worried. The other kids in the house were still fast asleep, so when the boy entered the main part of the house, the man that he had met the previous day was awake, and the wee boy said to him, "Can you please walk me home? I didn't mean to fall asleep." And the man said, "Sure, of course. Let's go." As the boy and the man are walking back down towards the stream, the sun was up now and he was aware of a beautiful orchard on the side of the path they were on and a cornfield on the other side. Two beautiful features that the boy had never seen before. The pair made small talk. The boy thanked the man for his hospitality and the man thanked him for joining them and playing with his kids and just generally having fun. As the pair were walking, they came to almost like a natural crossroads when the stranger stopped. He told the boy, "If you just head down to the right and then up a wee bit, you'll arrive at the stream that I met you at yesterday. I better get back to my family now." So the boy, thinking nothing of it, he thanked the stranger and continued on his journey. After a few steps, he curiously turned around to see the man, but he was shocked. When he turned around, not only did he not see the man, but there was no orchard, no cornfield. Instead, it was just deep, dark forest. As the wee boy turned back in the direction of the stream, he saw a small group of people running towards him, one of them being that family friend that he saw on the porch the day before. It was clear to the boy that it was his family and friends, and they were clearly worried about him being out overnight. So the boy was like, it's okay, I'm here, I'm safe, I'm so sorry I fell asleep. But they were all so angry and panicked. The boy looked at the family friend and said that he was confused. Why didn't you tell my parents that I was with you last night? At which point the guy was like, what are you talking about? You've been missing for 3 days, and I've been with your family the entire time. We've been searching for you. The boy would tell them what happened, and about how he met this stranger by the stream, about the cabin, and the family friend also being there. He took them to where the cabin was, but there was nothing there. Just deep forest, and certainly no cabin. They also said that since the boy went missing 3 days ago, they could hear this horrible rhythmic drumming noise coming from somewhere out in the woods, but they were unable to pinpoint exactly where it was coming from, and that the drumming stopped the second the boy showed up. So what's really going on? Are all these incidents nothing more than just tragic events that people inherently believe have paranormal, supernatural, or even extraterrestrial explanations? I've done a ton of research into these cases, and across the Don't Blink series that I plan on making, we will cover lots of them, some of which may not actually be classed as 411 in the true sense of them being investigated by David Paulides, but still involve strange encounters in the wilderness. Personally, I feel that something bigger is going on. I really do. I feel that a lot of people that do these videos, David Paulides included, well, they kind of skirt around it and don't commit to any given explanation. Look, there's so much about this world, the universe, space and time that we know nothing about. It's like taking an iPad back to ancient times and showing the folk of ancient Egypt. Their heads would explode. That's how I feel. I think we're like little kids trying to squeeze a square block into a circular hole. Here's one clip that I saw recently that shocked me.
And that's where they say Eisenhower made a deal with these aliens, that they could kidnap people and do experiments, but they couldn't just do it anywhere. They had specific places, which were our national forest.
What?
Yeah, dude. You've never heard of this.
This sounds amazing. Please keep going.
And so, this is where the missing 411 come from.
The missing information? What missing information?
No, the missing 411.
What do you mean by that?
Which is all these people have mysteriously disappeared in force.
So we're going to wrap this up here for now. We'll be coming back to this topic in future videos for sure. Make sure you subscribe though, so you don't miss anything else. Take care of yourself, folks. Have a great weekend, and regardless of what's going on in your world, try your best to keep smiling.